Hey guys. Um, well, this episode is going to be kind of different. Not joking, it is literally 5 in the morning right now. I have been trying to fall asleep for like the past 4 hours. I've tossed and turned. I've tried everything. I've tried reading. I tried drinking water. I tried listening to music. I just tried laying there. I tried counting sheep. I tried opening a window. I tried turning on the air conditioning. I tried turning off the air conditioning. I tried all sorts of pillow and blanket combinations. I've turned upside down, backwards. I've tried everything, okay? And I just cannot fall asleep because my brain will not turn off per usual, which seems to be a frequent occurrence these days. Like my brain will not shut off, and then right before I wake up, I get a terrible nightmare. That's my daily routine. And to be honest, sleeping for me is a very exhausting activity. I don't enjoy it. It's very mentally and emotionally draining. Like, literally, the other night, I had a nightmare that my bed was infested with giant earthworms, and the more I killed them, the more they spawned in my blankets, and I literally had like an anxiety attack that woke me up in my sleep. So that's like my typical sleeping routine. And so at this point, I've basically given up on the idea of sleep for tonight. I'm just going to maybe take a nap later. So I decided in this emotionally drained state of mind is usually when I get my most creative. As it's usually when the creative juices start flowing, I get the most rambly, I get the most I guess you could say sad, most introspective during this time when I cannot sleep, when I'm tired and slightly delusional, and there's just a lot on my mind. And it got me thinking about the physical effects of IB. So that's what we're going to talk about this evening, morning, I don't even know anymore. That's what we're going to talk about, the physical effects of IB. And I think this is actually like the perfect setup to have, because what I'm feeling right now is pretty much what I felt physically throughout all of IB. And to be honest, I still struggle with a lot of the physical side effects of IB. And this episode is definitely gonna be harder for me to talk about. Like, I don't think anybody in my life fully knows the extent of what I experienced throughout the past 3 years. So we're gonna talk about it in hopes that maybe someone out there who's doing IB right now or just graduated from IB can relate to some of this, because I don't think it's very widely talked about. And I don't know if that's just because nobody else experiences this, or maybe it's just like a taboo subject to, talk about the physical side effects and all the personal things that go on throughout your IB experience. And maybe there is a fear of being portrayed as weaker or vulnerable or less than if you're experiencing more side effects than those around you. So I'm just going to talk about the physical things I experienced in hopes of sort of giving you a more raw, real look at the IB experience and sort of define what difficult really meant for me, at least. And I'm sorry if I sound tired, for obvious reasons. I'm tired. Alright, so I have my list here, and quite conveniently, the first one on the list is sleep deprivation. And this was definitely a major side effect of IB. Obviously, you're going to be staying up later into the night, working on homework, doing your assignments, studying, etc. But for me, a lot of the sleep deprivation came from procrastination. Oftentimes, I would stay up until like 1 or 2 in the morning, literally doing nothing. I would just be watching YouTube videos. And this was sort of what created this like deadly cycle of sleep deprivation. Because I ran into the issue where I would sit down to work, I would get intimidated by the work, and then I would procrastinate for like 2 to 3 hours watching YouTube videos or playing piano or basically just wasting my time in any form possible so that I could avoid dealing with whatever it was that I had to be doing. So I would often stay up until, like I said, 1 or 2 in the morning doing nothing. And it stressed me out so much because I knew that I was just wasting time. Like I was cutting away from my sleeping time. I was not getting any work done. I was just sitting there feeling super anxious, feeling super guilty about myself. Yet I continued to stay up in hopes that somehow I would get my life together and start working at 2 a.m. I guess I'll insert a piece of advice here, is that if it's that late and you're tired and you find yourself just wasting time, just go to bed, okay? It's better to go to bed early and get nothing done than stay up later in hopes that you'll get something done later on in the night, but you just end up feeling super anxious and even more exhausted than before. So along with sleep deprivation came the giant purple eye bags. So probably for 2 years straight, and to this day, I still have like terrible eye bags that will just not go away. And also, I developed very poor sleeping habits because of IB. And this included insomnia. I had a lot of anxiety before going to bed, like I said, because I often went to bed out of guilt or just like pure exhaustion. It was never, I can go to bed peacefully. It was always, I have to go to bed now because I have to get up again in like 3 hours. That, like, sleeping became more of like a chore, just another chore, or just like the intermission between going to school and continuing to do my homework. So sleeping was not very enjoyable. It caused me a lot of anxiety. But the main issue with my sleeping was the nightmares. I experienced terrible, horrible nightmares all throughout my IB experience. And I've Googled the cause of nightmares, and it's stress, okay? Nightmares / dreams are just your brain's way of processing what's happening in your real life. It's your brain's way of sort of cleaning itself out. And a lot of what you experience in your daily life is manifested in your dreams. So often my nightmares would involve me getting chased by shadowy figures or people trying to kill me. Or it would be me being late for class and showing up like an hour late. Or it would be me failing to study for an exam, and I would be in an exam room, confused, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. or it would be some sort of humiliation where I would be the only clueless one. I would be the only stupid one, and everyone was laughing at me. And I think that's a very telling sign of what was going on. Like, being chased is usually a sign of anxiety and worry and always feeling like something's catching up to you. And that was very much what IB felt like. It was constantly these deadlines catching up to me. Just things on the back burner, constantly burning. And I just never caught a break. I'll actually tell you a story about one of my nightmares. It wasn't even a nightmare. This was like a pure hallucination. So I wake up one day. I think this was grade 12, first semester of grade 12. So basically the darkest point of IB, the lowest point. I wake up, I look at the clock. It's like 7 o'clock in the morning. And in my brain, I'm thinking, I'm going to be late for school. Which is not logical, first of all. 7 a.m. is perfectly normal time for me to get up. But in my brain, I thought I was going to be late for school. So I scramble around, I turn on the light, I go into the bathroom, I start brushing my teeth, and I see that my brother's room light is still on. Under the door, I can see that the light in his room is on. So I'm thinking, okay, good, my brother is awake so that I can get him to school on time too. So I start brushing my teeth. And as I'm brushing my teeth, my dad comes up the stairs and he looks super groggy and he's rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. He looks super confused and he's like, "Sonny, what is going on? What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm brushing my teeth. I'm going to be late for school. What are you talking about? Why haven't you gone to work yet?" Because usually my dad's already gone by the time I wake up. So I'm super confused and he's like, "It's literally 4:30 in the morning. What are you doing?" And so I go back into my room and the clock says 4:30, even though I swear when I woke up, I saw 7 o'clock on my alarm clock. And that was when I knew I had a problem, okay? I full on hallucinated being late for school. It was such a fear of me being late for school became such an intense source of paranoia and fear. Especially since I went to Chinese school on Saturday mornings, I would have to get up early as well to go to school. So oftentimes on Saturday mornings, I would jolt awake or fall out of bed because I was so scared I was going to be late. And I could just never fully relax, even in sleep. And I guess the sense of apprehension really exacerbated my anxiety. And probably for all 2 years of IB, I never got a good night's sleep. Except maybe in the summer, but in the school year, it was definitely a lot of panicking and nightmares. So that was the sleep part of IB. Another thing I started experiencing was back pain and joint pain. Now, this is largely my own fault. I do have bad posture and I do carry around a heavy backpack. And also because of the pandemic, my high school got rid of lockers, so everybody had to carry around their books, their binders, their coats, their lunches. We couldn't store anything anywhere. So my backpack was very heavy. But more than that, it was just the extremely sedentary lifestyle I adopted for these 2 years. Because, like I said in previous episodes, I spent all of my time just preoccupied with IB-related things. I was always busy doing some IA, some EE, some TOK assignment or just studying for my normal classes, regular homework I had on the day-to-day, or studying for exams or unit tests, or I would be playing piano or researching universities to apply to. It just was a lot of sitting. And if I wasn't sitting, I was carrying around a heavy backpack. Yes, obviously, I tried to incorporate exercise as much as I could, but overall, I would be sitting or laying down probably 95% of my day. And naturally, that just leads to a lot of back pain. Your joints become stiff. You adopt a poor posture, especially when you're tired and you're defeated. You don't have the energy to sit up straight, okay? You're bent over, you're slouched over your desk. You can barely hold yourself up, okay? You can barely hold your head up straight. There's no way you can sit straight. You know what I mean? So naturally, I started getting a lot of back pains. My back cracked all the time. It hurt, especially like under my shoulder blade and in my lower back. My neck would hurt sometimes. My knees would crack a lot. My wrists started cracking. My ankles would crack every time I walked up the stairs or ran up the stairs. My hips started cracking. Just everything started cracking. My dad took me to the doctor for my back pain, actually, because he was genuinely concerned that there was some issue with my joints, like maybe I had scoliosis or something. So I went to the doctor. The doctor made me touch my toes, lift my legs up one at a time, do a few stretches, and he was like, no, your flexibility is perfectly fine. You just have bad posture. You need to exercise more. But I literally could not. So much of my time was just eaten up by my academic obligations. And yes, I could have cut out more time to go outside more and go on more walks and whatever, but I was just so caught up in my head. Anything that wasn't dedicated towards IB or academics felt like a waste of time to me in my head. I couldn't go on a walk outside. I couldn't even go for a 30-minute hike with my parents or something because it felt like I was wasting my time. And I don't know if that was just me, but it was really hard for me to take a break and clear my head for a little bit. So only in the summertime would my back pain just go away for a couple weeks, and then the second the school year started, it would come back again. So that happened, and I still struggle with a lot of back pain to this day because, one, I guess I've gotten into a habit of cracking my back, which is definitely not healthy, and two, I just developed very poor working habits and very poor sitting habits, which I'm still trying to work on. But a lot of that did originate in my high school years, which is just fantastic. Now we're getting into some of the more serious things. IB led me to develop quite a bit of body dysmorphia. And this is not something I'm fully comfortable talking about yet. But like I said, I became quite sedentary during my IB years. I was sitting a lot. I wasn't exercising as much. And I was never the most athletic kid, But in junior high, I did do a lot of activity. I was going to dance classes 3 times a week. I was walking to school. I went on walks with my parents. I went outside a lot. I had gym class every day. There was quite a bit of activity going on. But the second IB started, first of all, no more gym classes. Also because of the pandemic, a lot of things got canceled. I also had to drop a lot of extracurriculars just based on time commitment. So naturally, I started sitting more. And on top of that, I sort of developed a habit of emotional/stress eating. Like when I get super anxious, or I guess when I'm procrastinating, I have a tendency to resort to food as like a coping mechanism or a distraction. And so because of that, I started gaining some weight, and it definitely wasn't something I was familiar with. I had never gained this much weight before, and I didn't like the way my body looked. I guess circling back to the emotional eating, I kind of want to talk about this a little bit because I think this could be applied to other aspects outside of food, whether it be video games or in the real world like alcohol, drugs, just sources of addiction for people. Because when you're that low, when nothing in your life makes you happy anymore, that one bite of food or that one TV show or whatever it is that sparks some joy, you become addicted to it because it's the only thing that numbs you or removes you from this pain that you're experiencing. And I think that's how addiction starts. And so for me, I became slightly addicted to food and sugar. So often late at night when I would be stressed and tired and anxious, I would start eating. And obviously, you're not going to make the most healthy decisions in the middle of the night, right? You're going to turn to things high in fat and sugar, highly processed foods. And I borderline developed an eating disorder, or at least disordered eating. Like I would eat beyond the point of fullness. I wasn't even hungry. I was just so stressed out that I needed to distract myself with something. And food tasted good. Food was a physical distraction that I could rely on. And in many ways, I relied on food as my only source of joy. But of course, it only lasts mere seconds. Like whatever gratification you get from food is gone in an instant, and I would just be filled with waves of overwhelming guilt, like 10 times more guilty than before, because all these thoughts of self-hatred would just come flooding in. I knew what I was doing wasn't good for my body. It wasn't good for my self-image. I was only fueling the fact that I didn't like the way I looked, that I was gaining more weight. And on top of that, I had terrible acne that I had never experienced before. My skin was very bad because I was eating so poorly. And then as a result, I kind of started restricting myself during the day. I would sometimes skip breakfast or eat very little for lunch. And a lot of the time I would just say I wasn't hungry because I knew that at nighttime, when everybody else had gone to sleep, I would be rummaging around in the kitchen trying to find food. And it really became this endless cycle of borderline binging/restricting. And I'm using that term very loosely because I was never officially diagnosed with anything. But I do think I had some sort of problem. Like this was not normal, right? So it's really hard for me to control myself. And so I would restrict myself during the day so that I could, I guess, quote unquote, save calories for later on in the day. And consequently, I became sort of obsessed with exercise, which seems contradictory because I never really had time to exercise. Like I said before, I was sitting a lot of the time. So I would literally cut out any time I had possible to exercise. And that sometimes meant working out in the middle of the night, like in the basement or in my room in the dark, or I don't know, like just whatever time I had I would dedicate it to exercise, even if it meant cutting away from my sleep. And during the summer, I would just sort of become obsessed with the idea of getting back in shape. And I would wake up super early to go on runs. Then after a run, I would come back and do like another hour of home workouts. Or I just like over exercise. I exercised a lot. Or just whenever I wasn't thinking about school, I was thinking about food or calories or exercise or how my body looked and how I could get back into shape. It definitely wasn't healthy at all, and I really just like hated every aspect of my life during this time because nothing about it was enjoyable. And I constantly had to pretend like I was faking it, both in terms of academics and in terms of food. And I had this like giant secret that was stressing me out because I was secretly eating in the middle of the night and I felt so guilty about it. At the beginning of every school year, I would always experience this like regression of I had a good schedule worked up over the summer, and then naturally I would just stop exercising, and then I would see all my progress just go down the drain, and I would be even more depressed than before because I'm always when you're experiencing body dysmorphia, you're always comparing yourself to other people and to yourself. You're comparing yourself to better versions of you. You're comparing yourself to the past you that you perceive as better. So it was just exhausting to exist. I will say, however, running was actually more beneficial than not. Because even though a lot of the time I was running for the sake of exercise and trying to get back in shape, I realize now that it was a very therapeutic thing for me because it forced me to go outside. I often went alone, so I could just like clear my thoughts, listen to some music, listen to a podcast, and the rhythmic stride of running is actually pretty like meditative, and it helped me calm my mind down a little bit, and just getting out into nature was very, very helpful. So I actually really enjoyed running, and I think it's one of my preferred forms of exercise now. So it was something I enjoyed. However, of course, everything good has to be tainted by IB. In IB, there's something called the CAS portfolio, which is creativity, activity, and service. And it basically encompasses all the extracurriculars you could possibly think of, and you have to record everything you do in these 2 years of IB. You have to record what you did, when you did it, with whom you did it with. You have to have a supervisor, you have to have photos, images, or just record of what you were doing, and you have to write a reflection on what you learned from these experiences and how they fulfill the CAS outcomes. And this is what I truly hate about IB, is that it literally rules every single part of your life. Because this one hobby you could have had for yourself, this one thing you could have just done for fun, is now plagued by this thought of, I have to be recording this. What am I learning from this? How am I going to get a supervisor to sign off on this? Like, how do I prove that I learned something or that I'm even doing it, right? So anything enjoyable or mildly relaxing, mildly entertaining is tainted by IB. And so even when I was running, I was thinking about, how am I going to record this for CAS? And I hate that so much because nothing in my life I was doing for myself. everything I was doing was out of obligation and filled with just dread, and nothing gave me joy in life because everything I was doing was for IB. And yes, I'll acknowledge that because of CAS, I was pushed to do a lot of things I would have never done. I really was forced to get out of my comfort zone and make myself a more well-rounded individual because I had to fill out those 3 strands of CAS. But at the end of the day, I really wish that IB would just get rid of CAS altogether, because it really steals whatever time you could have had for yourself and just ruins it with another looming deadline that you have to hand in at the end of your 2 years. So I guess that wraps up the body dysmorphia portion. There was so much more that goes into it, but I'm still kind of like processing everything about that. So maybe I'll make another episode talking about this topic in depth at a later time. But that's all I'll say on that for now. Actually, no. One more note is that aside from like weight gain and feeling guilty about your body and whatever, you just overall develop very poor eating habits. Because you're so sleep deprived and you're in such a time crunch that often you're just forced to skip meals simply because you're running late or you don't have time. And this wasn't just me. Like, a lot of people simply skipped meals because they did not have time to eat. And that's like another big thing. Anyways, yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Another thing I experienced was, this is sort of more like a trivial one, but wrinkles and frown lines. And I guess I never realized this, but when I'm thinking really hard about something or when I'm stressed, I tend to furrow my brow a lot, or I tend to look really concerned. And when you're stressed for 2 years straight, you tend to have a constant look of concern on your face. And because of that, I developed like this, I guess, line between my eyebrows, or just like a frown line. And honestly, it's a pretty big insecurity of mine. I don't like that I have this permanent frown line on my head, and I don't like the fact that I constantly look stressed. So, yeah, that's it. But I mean, it's still something, right? Like, it's not good to always look stressed, because that means you constantly are stressed. But it's more of a vanity thing, whatever. Another thing I experienced was worsened eyesight. And this is actually something I like truly regret. Because this was a big sacrifice for me. Prior to IB, I haven't been to the eye doctor in quite a few years. But before IB, I would guess that I had 20/20 vision, if not better than 20/20 vision. I could look across the classroom and read the words on like a small poster on the wall. That's how good my vision was. But naturally, throughout IB, you're constantly staring at a screen. You're just constantly oscillating between different screens. You're either staring at your computer, you're staring at your phone because you want to take a break from your computer, or if you have an iPad, you're staring at your iPad to take notes from the screen that the teacher is projecting onto the wall. Like, your life is just surrounded by screens because so much of your work involves technology and is done online. And compounded with the pandemic, everything is on Zoom, so now you're taking classes online. So my screen time was probably 15 hours a day. This is not an exaggeration. During the pandemic, in the height of 2021, my screen time was probably 15 plus hours a day. And that really takes a toll on your eyesight. So now, like, I don't have glasses because I'm irresponsible, but now I can barely see something that's halfway across the room. Like, my eyesight has deteriorated significantly in the past 2 years. A lot of that could be just because of the pandemic, but a lot of that was also IB. That is something, like I said, I regret a lot because this is permanent damage. How do you repair your eyes? And your eyes are something that you only have one set of, you know? This is something I will have to live with for the rest of my life because I wanted to, get ahead for 1 year in university. I wanted to get a couple credits. I wanted to feel smart. This is why I question if IB was worth it because there were so many lifelong health detriments that I will have to live with probably for the rest of my life and things I will never get back because I chose IB. And my eyesight, I'm genuinely so sad about it. Anyways, let's talk about something even more sad. I developed some OCD like tendencies. I'm not going to say OCD because I've never been diagnosed. Again, this is all alleged speculation. But according to my Google searches, I do have some form of OCD. And I do believe this was a manifestation of my anxiety. Like, whenever I was stressed, aside from eating, another thing I would do is pick at my skin and pick at my hair. Now, this might be kind of triggering or gross for some people, so if you're not comfortable with what I just mentioned, just click off or skip ahead however many minutes. I don't know. So the first sort of issue is what I would consider a minor form of dermatillomania, which is a skin picking disorder. For me, it was mainly picking at my cuticles and hangnails specifically. And this all started because my mom got me a new pair of nail clippers from the dollar store. And if you know anything about new nail clippers, is that they're deadly sharp. They're like almost lethal weapons. And whenever I was stressed, I would take those nail clippers and sort of almost use them as tweezers to pick out hangnails on the side of my fingers. And I don't know if you ever pulled at a hangnail before, but it feels really satisfying. And I know a lot of people are not going to understand this feeling or any of what I'm saying right now, but there is something satisfying about pulling at a hangnail such that there is like just a perfect amount of pain. And that was something that helped me forget about IB for a second, right? It was one of those brief, happy moments that allowed me to escape IB for just a moment, and I became addicted to it. I would pick at my fingers all the time, and there are only so many hangnails that can occur naturally on your fingers, right? So it wasn't long before I started manufacturing hangnails, and I would literally start like slicing pieces of my nail off my finger. And it got to a point where I was literally deforming my fingernail. Like one of my fingernails has like a permanent indent in it because I accidentally shaved off a little too big of a chunk one time. And all my cuticles were constantly red or bleeding or just leaking pus or whatever, white blood cells. I don't know. They were always just looking real beat up. And on top of that, I lived in a very dry climate, so they were always cracked and just bleeding, and they looked disgusting. But I couldn't help it because I would get stressed, and whenever I would get stressed, I would start picking at my nails. And this also, not to the same extent, but also transferred over to my face, because I started having bad acne because of my poor eating habits. I would pick at my acne a lot of the time. And a lot of this I wasn't even aware of it. It would just be like a natural thing that I would just start doing. And before I knew it, like my face is bleeding and I'm like, how did this happen? So this is why it's so hard to explain my IB experience, because a lot of it is interconnected and a lot of it is like a domino effect, right? Like because of the stress, because of the anxiety, I started having bad sleeping habits, and then I got depression, and then that led to, these OCD like tendencies, and then that also led to poor eating habits, which led to body dysmorphia and this obsession with exercise, and then just a whole lot of issues arose at once. Anyways, the second OCD type thing I started experiencing was trichotillomania. Again, I'm using these terms like very, very loosely because I don't think it was anything major or severe. But trichotillomania is a hair pulling disorder. And this one was definitely worse than my skin picking. I kind of already had a problem with this prior to going into IB, but it just got so bad. Like every night I would just sit there pulling at my hair because I was so stressed out. And I started developing some sparse areas on my head, and then I would get so insecure about how much hair I was losing due to stress and just pulling at it all the time. And that would just compound on top of the guilt I already had of all the other things going on in my life. And the thing with trichotillomania, at least for me, is that I had to count all the hairs I was pulling out. And I don't know why this is, but I do think it's like a common thing for people with this disorder, is like you're so like meticulously obsessing over your hair. So for me, it was whatever hair I pulled out, I had to count it almost as like a funeral for my hair. Like this sounds actually like insane, like nonsensical, and I don't really think anyone who doesn't experience this would understand it. But I had to count out every strand of hair into the trash, and it just took up so much of my time, and it also became like a procrastination mechanism, and it was so easily triggered too. Like if I even saw a piece of hair on the floor, I would go into this hair pulling frenzy. And it really distracted me from my work, and I wouldn't be able to focus because whenever I would pull at my hair, again, it would be associated with these feelings of guilt and even more anxiety. And it wasn't even anxiety over the fact that I wasn't getting work done. It was the anxiety over the fact that I was losing all my hair. And to make matters worse, I started developing white hairs, people. I started growing gray hairs at the young age of, 15, 16, I started growing white hairs. And a lot of people in IB started growing white hairs as well. I don't know if that's normal. I don't think it is. I highly doubt any teenager who's in the prime of their youth would be developing white hairs. So that just shows the extent of the stress going on. And I guess to further that point, this is definitely TMI, but we're already here, so whatever. I experienced amenorrhea. And if you don't know what amenorrhea is, it's basically where you lose your period for an extended amount of time, like months. And causes of amenorrhea are things like pregnancy, hormonal changes, menopause, or I don't know, various diseases. I don't really know. But for me, it was stress, extreme stress. I actually find this quite fascinating because during the school year, I would lose my period entirely. So for 10 months straight, I probably only got my period like once or twice at most for 2 years, for all 2 years of IB. And then only during the summer, when the stress was slightly less, I would get my period back. And then the second the school year started, I would lose it again. I guess that's like the most clear indicator to me that IB was the root of the problem, because it was so perfectly correlated with the school year that I knew it had to be that. Like, it wasn't anything to do with my exercise. It wasn't anything to do with my nutrition. Maybe it had to do with sleep, but it was just stress. And obviously that's not healthy. But what are you supposed to do about it, you know? Like, you can't just go to a doctor and have them prescribe you something to be less stressed. The only way to fix the problem is to quit IB. And that simply wasn't a viable option for me because, first of all, my school did not allow you to quit IB. And second of all, I was stubborn. I refused to believe that I was too weak for IB, even though it was literally killing me. Anyway, that was the bulk of the hard parts to talk about. I can talk about all of these topics in individual episodes because I am definitely glossing over a lot of details here. Okay, another thing I experienced, and I think this is going to be the last one I talk about, is a weakened immune system. And I think I don't exactly know the cause of this, but I believe it's, again, the severe sleep deprivation. You're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not exercising, you're sad all the time. All these things lead to an overall weaker immune system. And I know I had a weak immune system because I somehow got a giant bruise on my shin at the beginning of grade 12. I don't know how it got there. I don't know when I got it, but it stayed on my leg for 3 months. 3 months. And I Googled this because I had never experienced something like this. Because usually bruises go away in a couple weeks, right? And I thought I didn't know what was happening to me. Like, I thought I had broken something, or maybe I had severed an artery, or I don't know. But the bruise stayed on my leg for 3 months. And that just goes to show how weak my body was. And on top of that, I also have bad eczema. And again, I've Googled this. Nobody really knows the cause of eczema, but a lot of it has to do with irritation, stress, environmental sensitivities, and also if your immune system is weak, it can lead you more susceptible to developing eczema. So my eczema flare-ups, which are mainly on my hands, were so bad during my IB years. And I had struggled with eczema since junior high. Again, this is something else I can talk about another time. But I had kind of got it under control at the beginning of high school. But the second IB started, it just got so bad. Like, the entire back of my hand was dry, it was flaking, it was cracking, it was bleeding, and no matter how much lotion, no matter how many creams, no matter how much Vaseline I put on my hands, they would just not rehydrate themselves. And to me, it felt like it wasn't anything really to do with irritation or humidity. It was just purely stress. It was my body telling me that I needed to take a break and recover for a sec. But I couldn't because I was stuck in this inescapable position. So, in conclusion, IB to me felt like I was living with a chronic illness. And I don't want to say this to like offend people living with chronic illness, but to me, it felt like what it would feel like to live with a chronic illness. And obviously, IB came to an end for me eventually, but people who actually have chronic illness, they have to deal with it all their lives, and I truly, my heart goes out to those people because the amount of just discomfort and hopelessness I felt living in that state was like insurmountable. I never felt this trapped in my own body, in my own mind, in my own situation. It felt like things were just happening to me. Not only that, a lot of these things I still struggle with to this day because of IB. Because I guess in my head, I just had this notion that I can sacrifice these things. You know, I can sacrifice my physical health. I can sacrifice a couple days of sleep. I can sacrifice, my body or my health or whatever. I can sacrifice all these things because in my head, I thought that IB was temporary. So I had a plan, like the second IB is over, the second I graduate, I'm just going to get my life back together. This is only temporary, and you just have to hold off a little bit longer until you can recover all those things, right? And surprise, surprise, that was not the case. Because 2 years is a long time. And in 2 years, you can develop some pretty strong habits that die hard, okay? And so throughout my IB experience, I developed poor sleeping habits. I developed lasting mental health issues. I developed bad posture, lasting back pain, poor eyesight, bad circulation, OCD-like tendencies. All these things carried through with IB. I guess I just never anticipated that because I thought it would be temporary, and the second IB ended, all my problems would go away. But it didn't, because those brain pathways have already been run through and through in my head. And it's so hard for me to break free of those cycles now. And so that's why even in university, I'm repeating some of the same things I did in IB, because it's what I've known. It's what I've been doing for the past 3 years. How am I supposed to change, So a lot of the side effects extend so far beyond just your 2 years in IB. A lot of it will extend throughout your entire life. Like, I'll probably be struggling with nightmares and anxiety for the rest of my life. And that makes me question if IB is worth that. Is IB worth these long-lasting health issues? And of course, to be fair, I don't know for certain if I would have developed these things regardless of IB. You know, if I had just gone with the regular curriculum, I could have just as likely developed all these things. But I think, strictly speaking, IB definitely did not help. And it definitely compounded a lot of my issues and concentrated them into like a very short period of time in which I was dealing with so many things at once, and all of them just snowballed into one another to the point where I truly felt hopeless. And I, even now, like listening to myself speak about this, it's hard for me to really articulate how I felt, because you seriously just had to be there to understand how trapped you feel. And how, I guess the main emotion was just guilt on so many levels. Guilt that I wasn't doing work, guilt that I was ruining my health, but I wasn't even doing anything productive with it. Guilt that I wasn't spending my time with family and friends, which I'm going to talk about in the next episode, the social side effects. Guilt that I wasn't eating well, guilt that I wasn't sleeping well, guilt that I wasn't exercising, guilt that my grades weren't good, guilt that I was disappointing my parents and myself, guilt that I wasn't going to get the future I wanted. Just so much guilt and pressure to succeed. So it really was like living with a chronic illness. It was hard to get out of bed most days. Anyways, let's go with some tips and tricks, shall we? How do you even I don't know. I can't give any tips and tricks for this episode because I haven't figured it out yet. Like the physical side of IB, I think, is more of just symptoms of the real problem, which is the mental side. So I guess my one trick was the running thing. Going outside and doing something that calms your mind. Doing something that relaxes you. Whether that be listening to music or just having a conversation with someone, or journaling, playing an instrument, or exercising, or painting. I don't know, anything that gives you peace and can sort of give you a chance to properly calm down, especially if you're like me and you have trouble sleeping, and sleeping is not necessarily a relaxing activity. Find something that just allows you to breathe and like calm your thoughts for a second. Yeah, that's really my only words of wisdom here, because a lot of this stuff I still have not figured out. Anyways, to fully wrap up this episode, I'm going to give you a song recommendation. And as always, it's a sad, sad song rec, because would it even be an episode of Ramblings with an Elderly Teen if it wasn't a sad song? So this one is called She Used to Be Mine by Sarah Bareilles. I don't know. But She Used to Be Mine, it's talking about a person you once had, or the person you once were, and sort of reminiscing on the past self, the person, the past you that you will never get back. So, great, cheery, lighthearted stuff. A good listen if you want to shed a few tears here and there. Yeah, I am exhausted. The sun has officially risen at this point. A new day has started. I think I'm gonna go back to bed, take a nap, And stay tuned for next week when I talk about the social side effects of IB. And then that's about it for the mini-series. After that, it's just one more episode with my concluding thoughts, answering the question, is IB worth it? Which I think you may already know my answer, but we're going to talk about it anyways. And we're actually going to go over some pros in the last episode. So we're going to end it on a semi-high note. Or let me rephrase that. A semi-less lower note. Alright, that's all I have for you guys this morning. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.